So our conversation today is about vulnerability. We're gonna transition into that because it's a great conversation to have. If Sean might have to be vulnerable with me about the statement I just made and how much he want to tell me to put the gloves on later. But you know what? I'm down.
You're gonna have to be
I
vulnerable.
don't want to knock your wig off, Yusha.
And I'm with you. You're gonna have to get vulnerable as to how you got bald, because I know that's a vulnerable, conversation.
Hey, it'll come up in this conversation. I got a very direct answer as to why. So
we got 20 years of this, y'all. So we're gonna tell jokes, but we want to get into it. We want to make sure we have a serious conversation that really allows us to go through the shifts and changes of how we felt about vulnerability. And so we're just gonna start the conversation. Now, listen, I want to start by giving all of our listeners the technical definition of vulnerable. Definition of vulnerable: to be susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. To be susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. That is the technical definition of vulnerability. So my first question for us today, y'all, is what are your feelings about vulnerability? Its definition and your relationship to it. Mm.
I feel like vulnerability is the foundation of who I am. I feel like the idea of transparency and vulnerability rings at this point for decades in the rooms and spaces that I walk in. And I fell in love with the idea of it back at my lowest point, where I was, sleeping on a couch of one of my BE bros' crib, and that was the transition of me also going from a car and mom not even knowing that I was homeless at one point, you know what I'm saying, to just picking up the phone and saying, hey, bro, I don't have anywhere else to go. You mind if I come? You know what I'm saying? And he held me down, and I was able to wake up every day on that couch and try to figure out, how to make what I had thought was a set life work. And I came across a podcast that changed my life forever, which was The Power of Vulnerability, Brene Brown. And that's why I tell everybody to start at, right? And that was the moment where I realized vulnerability is strength. And as I started to as I started to practice that, right, I started to see my life start to evolve with not just, getting out of the space that I was in, but also finding my purpose in who I am. So, and I feel like that is the ultimate way to find freedom, is to be as transparent and vulnerable with the people that are around you. But the most important thing that I always say is vulnerability is a skill. You are not always going to get it right. And it takes a while to really learn it and figure it out. It's almost like a therapist. This is the example that I use, that first moment where you are open to the idea of a therapist, especially those who are against it. They go out and they seek a therapist and it's not really the right fit for them. And then they give up. Now you have to keep on finding who is the right fit for you. Finding the right therapist is a skill. So vulnerability is a skill. And every season you may need a different type of vulnerability, a different type of therapist. So vulnerability is everything. And I think it's one of the most powerful traits that a strong man can possess.
Yeah, Kurt, I want to push on you. I hear you saying that, and what I hear you saying is like my relationship with vulnerability is this. When I was sleeping on this couch, when I had this circumstance, right, it sounds like you had some level of support. I'm gonna tell y'all right now, I like vulnerability now. I love it. I understand it now. But that's within the last year or two because I hated the word vulnerability. But to be susceptible to hurt, harm, or danger physically or emotionally, why? Why would I want that? And I come from a place where people knew too much about you. They would use that against you, hurt you, laugh at you, treat you bad.
Yeah,
push you away.
That's why it is a skill, right? Learning who, how, what to share the information with. You are gonna become an expert over time of knowing the signs that let you know who can you go there with, and all it is gonna do is gonna help you to compartmentalize better the rooms that you engage in, right? The people that you engage in too, So that's a part of it.
Go ahead, Brian. My bad.
It is. I think, I think too, man, adding to that conversation, Usually when I was listening to you, man, I think that makes sense. Like, why would I want to be harmed, like intentionally? But I also don't know anything that ever grew from not being scathed a little bit. So I don't think I welcome the idea of being harmed. But like Kurt was saying, I do think I welcome that vulnerability is a practice skill. So I don't want my vulnerability to be hurtful or harmful to you, but I think internalizing things has more harmful impact that could potentially be explosive in a way because I'm burying or I'm suppressing certain things because I'm scared of the external outcome. So I think vulnerability is something that you practice. And I think you have to look at vulnerability from your point of view in terms of my vulnerability and my expression of who I am isn't necessarily for you. It's for me. Like I'm releasing this or I'm expressing this or I'm being, as we talked about, transparently open with you in hopes to share pieces of you. If you're not receptive to that and I'm harmed in the process, that's also a learning opportunity for me. But you have to learn how to practice that in a way that it doesn't close you off from the purpose of what being vulnerable actually is, which is to share and to be in a more leveled space emotionally so that people not understand you, but that there's a level of emotional maturity and respect for what it is that you share.
Hey, and then the other thing that's interesting that I know about this group of men, right, is we are truth seekers, right? The quickest way to get to the truth about who somebody is by expressing where you stand and what you feel about something and allowing them to show you how they respond, take it, or agree or disagree with it, right? So the sooner that I am my authentic self and telling you where I stand in something and then how you respond. So if I pillow talk, right? And then you know what if I tell you something and then you pillow talk and then later on it gets back to me, right? Now this is a petty example, right? I have now gotten quicker to the reality that you are this person, right? You know what I mean? And now I can govern myself accordingly, right? So like a lot of times when we go ahead and speak on the things that we say are true, we can see how people and things like respond to it and we get closer to it so that now we can move closer to where we need to be versus where we want it to be, or be around the people that we need to be around versus people that we don't need to be around. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Hey, Kurt, that was one time in college, bro. Stop bringing up the past, man. It's like, nah, but you know, I actually, so I agree with everything Kurt said, man. Like that's who I am, right? I will say though that I learned it unintentionally, right? And so as a kid, one of the great things that my mom did specifically, despite my environment and where I grew up, she always placed me in very diverse camps, summer camps, programs, so on and so forth, right? And so me just being a very jovial kid, you know, naturally being a leader, somebody that wants to talk and engage with people, I'm going in there and I'm just talking and I'm really, I'm thinking that we on the same level of or same wavelength of how we grew up. So I'm talking about eating oodles and noodles for dinner, or you know what I mean, like fried bologna and cheese sandwiches, this, that, and the third. And some of these Caucasian kids are looking at me like, what are those first of all? You know what I mean? But then talking about them going to their uncle's ranch and riding horses or so on and so forth. And so I say all of that to say that I led with that and then realized that unintentionally I was being very vulnerable. However, at a very young age, I also knew that I was in a space with those same people for a reason. And I will outshine those people in that space for a reason. So it didn't matter what our background was. And so I use my vulnerability from that standpoint of continuing to be true to myself. But then as they saw me being vulnerable, they saw how I was able to use that as a strength despite my upbringing and still shine and arise to the occasion. Right. Also in that though, what I did learn to Kurt's point is I learned how to not only identify when people were not being as vulnerable as me, and then use that as my gauge to kind of pull back, or realize the level of transparency that I need to to provide at certain times, depending on their level of vulnerability.
Yeah, I think that has to happen though, right? Like I think that like you have to have those experiences And I often ask people when I'm working with them, what was your introduction to vulnerability, right? Like, when do you remember? Because I don't know that my mom sat down and said, okay, let's talk about being vulnerable. I don't think anybody actually sat me down and said it that way. So a lot of times, your experiences or your exposure to vulnerable situations, I think there's, this idea of resiliency versus being forced to be resilient. And I think there are two different things, right? So I think that level of vulnerability, being hurt, having somebody not receive you when you are vulnerable, I think these are lessons. Like, these are natural lessons that I think have to teach you the appropriateness of being vulnerable, because I think there are moments where you can overshare. Like, I think there are moments where it's like, I don't know that everybody needs to know that. I think you might be oversharing or being a little too vulnerable in this moment in terms of privacy, or, certain areas of that you may not want everybody to be exposed to naturally. So I think that's an important piece. When did you meet the necessity to be vulnerable, and who taught you the levels or what that kind of looks like? Was it trial and error, or did somebody kind of walk with you through it?
Hey,
I love the question.
if I could jump in on this, because y'all said a whole lot, and I want to try to have a nexus here, but I also want to kind of like distinguish myself in it, because I'm finding some difference in it, right? So I want to answer your question, Brandon. I think the first time I was aware or exposed to vulnerability was through my mother. She's a single mother, and I'm the only child, so vulnerability was almost forced in our household, and led, because she had to be vulnerable, right? So I saw it real clear. And then I'm struggling with this concept that it's a skill set you have to learn. I get it, right, and how you use it, right? But y'all know I've kind of been a vulnerable person from the onset, right? And I've kind of always been that way, as long as I can remember. And it goes back to what Kurt was talking about. There was a level of freedom as a kid that I just needed to have in my space and in my environment, and I found the freedom in it through vulnerability very early on. Now, I think because I have been susceptible to harm, right, for so long, I don't really have a care of the level of vulnerability that I'm with people in any room, in any space, at any time, at any level. So I'm really trying to resonate a little bit, but I really can't, because back to that question about avoidance versus trying the first time, I'm really like, yeah, we've all been in spaces that we willingly walked into, spaces that we knew we were susceptible to harm, because we wanted to try something the first time. So, I'm just trying to draw the nexus, and I'm hearing people, man. It's a lot of good stuff.
Ali, and I'm so glad that you said that, right? Because to know Ali is to know that you are exactly that, right? You just organically show up in a very vulnerable way. Everybody's going to know how you feel, where you feel, in the most right way. You know what I mean? And what I want to point out to that is something can be a skill to some and a natural ability to others, right? You know what I mean? And the reality of it is, yes, you were born that way. You were gifted with this idea of vulnerability. So sometimes it's hard to comprehend it from this type of space of, but because it's hard to understand how other people don't have it, right? Or don't understand it, right? You understand it at such a young age that you didn't have to process it. You know what I mean? But there's millions of people, right, who have never even explored the idea of that culturally or whatever that may mean, right? So really, I mean, that's a blessing. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of where we have to lean into. It's just like the athlete. There's some athletes who can jump out the gym. And then there's some athletes who would never be able to jump high. And then there's some athletes who had to learn the mechanics to maximize the amount of force that they can put into the ground to get up as high as that
Right.
as they can.
I love all of the aspects that's coming from this and how we're using the different spaces and analogies to explain it. I want to speak for a brother that's not here. I really feel like, and I want to use this word lightly. I feel like we're speaking from vulnerability from a privileged standpoint of actually having the space to have people mistreat you or not create safety for you, but it still be space for you to continue to live your life. But we were all of us were born in the 80s during the crack epidemic, and depending on the neighborhood you was born from, being vulnerable could get you killed. And there was no space for there to be I learned my lesson from this type of situation. We, in some instances, I want to speak for the brothers who grew up in those spaces where there was not, there wasn't even a safety of, man, I can use my vulnerability to understand who can truly care for me, because that could be your last day, or that one word you say, or that thing that you give could get you backdoored. And we still got youth who are, especially here in DC in the district, we still got youth who are dealing with it where, you know, a moment of vulnerability could be your last, could be your one mistake.
And I think to that point though, you know, I think because as men, excuse me, especially men of color, we're not socialized as men that vulnerability is acceptable. So I think a lot of that, like, because I didn't grow up in a neighborhood like that, so I can't speak to it to that degree. So I want to be clear about that. But I think I do know that vulnerability is something that is taught and learned. Now, who teaches it to you and how you learn it, I think is going to vary, obviously, between the person. Ali said it's been more in his home. It was indoctrinated in his home. So we're going to meet vulnerability in different spaces. But I think men specifically, we're all Black men, we're having this conversation. We're not taught that vulnerability is necessity as a part of maleness or as a part of manhood. We're not taught that those two things are synonymous. So you may have males who don't understand that it is okay to cry, or that you're crying, so that means you're in a vulnerable space, and that I have to respect that or make sense of what that means for you. If I'm not taught that, that's where the harm starts. The harm is starting in the fact that I don't know that that's an okay moment for you, or that because I didn't see it from the other men in spaces that are supposed to be safe for me, I don't grow up with this connection to what vulnerability can look like. You know what I'm saying? So
I mean, I can speak for that man, for that guy, because I did come from that environment. And even though I was able to say that my mom put me in environments that allowed me to be able to adapt, that were multicultural, that were diverse, that was not reflective of my neighborhood, right?
right.
So I was able to truly, I'm blessed enough to be where I am now, and even in my maturation, because I had that opportunity to step outside of my neighborhood. But when I was in my neighborhood, I was a completely different person, right? Now, the result of that is that I am 39. I am now becoming a crier for the very first time in my life.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
And so, because there's a difference between being vulnerable and opening up and talking. There's a whole nother nexus of somebody who can freely and openly cry, right?
Yeah.
I'm this year, I'm talking about maybe even in the past 2 months.
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to clarify to the audience, you know, what vulnerability we're talking about too, right? Like, we aren't talking about being a bitch. Let's just make that very clear, right? Like, nobody on this podcast gives off the energy where another man feels like he can walk up to us and say anything and everything that they want to say, right? We command the level of respect when we walk in different types of rooms, no matter if it's corporate, if it's casual, if it's family. We are the leaders of our families and our ecosystems, right? We just happen to be leaders of ecosystems that don't have any ego, and we are really capable of coming together and sharing space. And it works because we have a lot of these intrinsic qualities that really allow these confident, well-versed men to exist without any issues. But at the same time, what we're saying is, as being leaders in all these other spaces outside of this group, right? We can have a moment where, you know, a family member or something that really moves us in our family, we can allow our emotions to show, right? And it not take away from the masculinity of who we are. I think, the past few years we've been talking about what is toxic masculinity. I think it can kind of get construed in a lot of different ways. Brandon, you can interrupt me if I'm wrong, right? But like I think just because you're not soft, that doesn't mean that it's toxic masculinity, right? You know what I mean? But at the same time, just because you cry, that doesn't mean that it's vulnerability. You know what I mean?
So those traits, when you talk about being toxic on the masculine level, those traits are usually the exacerbated or forced presentation, right, of being strong or being aggressive, like when you see those things in excess. And so that's where the toxic piece, or we use that verbiage, can kind of come into place as far as masculinity goes. And I think that vulnerable conversation, I think, like you said, there's an apex to it, or there's like levels to what that expression of vulnerability means. And oftentimes, I think from us, I don't know if everybody here has a son or, what have you, but I think for boys specifically, there's this separation of church and state, if you will, of strength and vulnerability that we hyper push or force this concept of boys don't cry, men or boys don't cry, which turns into men who may not. Sean, I love that you said that you are 39, brother, and you are now a crier. I love that for you. I will cry at the drop of a dime, and my family knows that, and I don't hide that from them. I've gone through certain experiences that have unlocked that level of safety for me. I want them to see that. I want my family to see me being expressive, because it's not always sadness that's associated with being vulnerable or being emotively expressive by crying. But we start from a very early age, even with the sports that we push our sons or males into, with teaching them bravado and confidence. When as a coach of a little league football team, I've seen 7-year-olds get hit and do what? Cry. It's new. That getting hit doesn't feel good. Kurt, I know you're probably still the best athlete on the panel today, but getting hurt does not. I mean, getting hit doesn't feel good.
Ali don't like that.
Ali, I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, Ali. I'm sorry, brother.
You see, he had to watch his face. He got real still for a second.
Ali was like, you know what? That's probably. He's like, I was agreeing with his brother till he said that, but it's true though. Like,
hey, I want to tell you why I laughed too. I had the visual of 2 7-year-old kids like hitting each other, and one of them 7-year-old kids be like, "Ouch!"
Because it's not dad in the living room anymore. It's not in the living room. It's hard. It's tough.
So Brendan, quite interestingly enough, is I'm about to go to my son's football game in a few, right? And there's a difference in learning that delicate balance, right, of teaching my son to be tough, you're right, having a moment where he realizes what he feels, but also understanding what's the mission at hand is the key here, right? Because I can be the dad who understands that my son is going to be undersized, right? And if he wants to do this, he has to have a little bit more grit than these other boys, right? And he's going to probably get knocked around a little bit more than another boy. So yes, it's like, hey, get back up. But then after the game, right, pulling him, sitting on the couch, being like, yo, CJ, just come here right quick. Hey, how did you feel, man? Oh, cool. Did it hurt? All right, hey, man, you did a good job of popping up. Listen, it's nothing wrong with crying. But if you know that you can like just push through it, try. And then if you need to cry, cool. Or on the discipline side, right? The discipline side is I'm learning no longer to say, stop crying, right? Now I'm saying, hey, go to the other room. If you still crying, come back down when you're when you're ready, right? Now that's relative to what the issue is, right? You know what I mean? But yeah.
I wanna ask y'all this, because Kurt, you brought up a good point in terms of how we're talking about it. Then we're all giving praise to vulnerability, but I want to ask the question to y'all, like, why is this important, right? Why as men are we really talking about this thing of vulnerability? Like, why is it I'm for me, right? But I want to direct this to y'all for the millions of people who I feel like are, like, Kirk talking about, are dealing with this concept of vulnerability. But like, I don't know if we're talking about why it's important. Like, because who cares that who cares that y'all are having these conversations with your kid? Who cares that like you've arrived to this point to use it as like, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I want to tell you, I want to jump right out there and I want to keep it short. Vulnerability is important to me primarily because, and I'll make this very self-specific, but it could also be a community thing, especially as we go bridge the gap today. I want to be married again. And so what I'm experiencing or what I've experienced in the dating world, especially in my dating world, is that I, over time, I learned not to be vulnerable, but to still make great sound decisions. All right. Because I learned how to like not take it personal, you know what I'm saying? For agreements, everything ain't about you. So I wouldn't be vulnerable about a lot of stuff, but I also allow myself to stop really processing emotions in a certain type of way. I always reframe my negative emotions to have this positive thought, and I would move straight to decisions. What that looked like in relationships, even with my daughter and with women I was dating, was that because I was skipping over the emotional part, the more vulnerable piece of myself and moving straight to decision, I'm maintaining my strength all the time, but now I don't have the skill or the practice to make space for them to do it. And so in relationships, you know,
I think we
the sisters or sisters, like, bro, you a robot, like you don't have no feelings. And I'm telling them, you got too many. Like, just make the decision. Like, there's a decision at the end. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so I had to learn to be vulnerable again, not to be vulnerable again. So I can make space for the people in my life, my daughter included, to have the space to feel. And then still at the end help them if they need it to draw a conclusion to a better decision. But to know that like it's okay to feel, it's okay to go through it.
Yeah. I love
I
that
want to.
response.
Oh, go ahead, Sean. Go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I love that response. And I think that there's so many different reasons and truths behind it because mine is different from what you should just said, right? I look at it and so vulnerability um used over time and worked out over time then becomes a skill that allows you to properly process emotion, right? Because without that, it could come out as anger or aggression, which anger or aggression, in my opinion, and in my experience, is really just unexpressed emotion. I felt a certain way in another area. And the majority of you guys know I was typically perceived at a younger age as being very angry and very aggressive, right? But I didn't have an outlet and I did not know how to truly express myself in certain areas. And it came out in that way.
Man, this is interesting because you know, my relationship with Ali and half man, half amazing, right, is very interesting in what that dynamic is. We are so much alike that we've been able to do life with each other at different points. And you know, there's a lot of things that were said here. So if I had to answer the question to what Ali asked, is understanding self in the most quiet moments, right? Understanding self to what, you know, half man, half amazing said, which was process emotions. You know what I'm saying? And just like him too as well. I have an aggressive personality, right? You know, and I had to learn how to navigate that, and that's also how we maximize the relationships that we have and that we want, right? How we show up, why we show up the way that we do, that all matters on the personal level. But then on the relationship level, like we talk about love languages, right? But if you aren't vulnerable enough to be that person or be that thing, right, that we need to be to learn how to make that person feel comfortable to be the best version of themselves, or to express themselves, right? Like one of the things that I can say is the things that I had to navigate in my process of becoming a divorced single father of a daughter who is, you know, well, first off, part of just going through the things that led up to our divorce, right? And how I had to show up to my ex-wife, right? And then the things that I experienced post. And then also having a 3, 4, 5-year-old little girl in that whole presence, right? Like the level of vulnerability that I had to make sure that I was developing and maximizing the skill was so important, and it's still relevant in the day-to-day life that I have now with the ecosystems of women that are in my space because of business, because of community, so on and so on. And I've been able to really just show up at a high level because of the willingness for me to embrace this idea of vulnerability. I just know the power of it, right? And I know that it's not taken advantage of when you're around the right people, and it helps you to find the right people.
Amen to that. I think vulnerability, Ali, going back to your the precipice of the question, man, I think it's important for me because I've seen professionally and personally that the alternative is damaging. And I don't know that my vulnerability is something that puts me in that same seat. I don't want damage with who I am as a person, because if I'm damaged, that means I'm likely to damage those around me, whether that's directly or indirectly in my expression of my feelings or my expressions of my thoughts. And so when I think about that concept of being vulnerable, it's natural for me, but there's levels to vulnerability that I've learned in being in a committed relationship and being married and being a father, that it's levels. No matter how natural it felt to me, being vulnerable with a partner is still different. Being vulnerable with my mother as an adult male versus a child is still a difference. So when we talk about it being a skill, that's why it's an ongoing practice, because you can't be the same type of vulnerable with every person in your ecosystem or in your space. Being vulnerable with my children versus being vulnerable with you all looks different. But I'm applying that skill in different spaces because the alternative to me is quiet. It's regress. It's burying thoughts and feelings. And I tell people professionally all the time, I don't care what you bury, it's going to show itself and grow in a totally different way. It's up to you if it grows unhealthily or if it grows and bears some type of fruit that you can benefit from. But it will show itself. I don't care what you bury or what you don't express. Your body's not made to compound and hold in those types of feelings and thoughts. It's going to show itself. I promise that to anyone who sits across from me. I don't care how you view it, it's going to happen that way. So why not me be on the front end of being able to navigate and control where my spaces are versus it controlling that shit for me?
Yeah, I appreciate y'all, y'all answering that, because I wanted us to make sure we were giving our communities a why.
Hey,
right?
yo, hold on, wait, Ali. Let's accent that, because Apple did it. The alternative is dangerous. And
Yeah.
Apple was like, boom, boom, what a mic drop.
Destruction.
I was just about to say that, Brandon, man. Like what you just said, brother, you went Super Saiyan, and I don't even know if you know it because the computer screen showed that you just went Super Saiyan, brother. That was dope. That was
I was
dope.
trying to talk through
that was great, bro.
Seeing fireworks and shit. I was like, is that me?
Hey, look, it was reacting. It was reacting to your mic drop, bro.
Yeah,
That was
crazy.
dope. So let's transition into our community spotlight, and we'll be back.
Hey, welcome back from our community spotlight. Y'all know what it is. We always want to make sure that we are giving spaces for the people in our community to shine. Any closing remarks on that conversation before we go into our working and winning?
Nah, man. I really just wanted to say vulnerability seems to be a necessity, a tool that we all need in terms of just knowing who we are, finding ourselves, finding freedom, getting close to God, getting closer to our people. And specifically for black men in this country, it's okay to be vulnerable. I want to say that, and I've been on a mission to make sure that people and black men know that it's okay to be vulnerable, and there's freedom in vulnerability, and there's power in vulnerability. So choose vulnerability, man. The sooner you choose it, man, the closer you're gonna get to your true self.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you said that, Ali. We're going to transition into working and winning. Sorry, Sean. I do want y'all to know, though, that our Patreon, our extended version of this conversation is, though we're saying be vulnerable and it's powerful and it is a skill, we're asking the question, we're holding ourselves accountable to thinking fully about the aspect of it and saying, hey, is the Black family, is the Black woman, is the world really ready for vulnerability from Black men?